People had always assumed that because it was solid, ice was much heavier than water. But not Galileo.
Galileo managed to turn buoyancy, things floating in water or sinking in water, into a court spectacle. That takes talent.
Galileo asked whether two balls of different weights would fall at the same speed. Most people thought the question was absurd. Of course, the lighter one would fall more slowly. But Galileo was not convinced. By dropping two balls from the top of the Leaning Tower of Pisa, Galileo proved that all objects fall at the same rate of acceleration. The royal professor had prefigured Newton's theory of gravity by half a century.
He was desperately trying to find simple arguments for complicated, for huge phenomena. That was always his angle. He was a master at trying to find these little vignettes that could encapsulate a very complex problem.
Galileo's hunger to observe was fed by a magnificent new invention, the astronomical telescope.
Most nights, Galileo would point the telescope toward the moon, and then you write down or you draw what you see every night. The way you build the case is by showing what you have seen over like 30 or 40 nights.
But what Galileo observed went against everything people had been taught. The moon was not the pure white heavenly body of church doctrine. Galileo was amazed.
It is like the face of the earth itself, which is marked here and there with chains of mountains and valleys.
All of what people had been believing in regard to astronomy collapsed, because the idea that beyond the celestial vault you get into the world of perfection proved to be wrong. Otherwise there wouldn't be all of those imperfections on the moon. And through the eyes of the prince, the telescope adds to the court another element of originality and wonder.
Galileo was the first man to discover that the sun had spots, to notice the unusual shape of Saturn, and to identify the Milky Way. And he was the first man to spot the moons of Jupiter. He named these mysterious objects after his patrons and protectors. He called them the Medici stars.
Behold, 4 stars reserved for your illustrious name, which make their journeys with marvelous speed, like children of the same family.
They were the most permanent monument that the Medici could hope for, because statues wear out, paintings fade, and the satellites of Jupiter do not fade. Nothing happens to them. They're there forever. I'm sure that watching the Medici stars was probably a family sport.
Thanks to Galileo, the Medici name was written into the universe. And thanks to Medici patronage, Galileo was the most famous scientist in the world. The English ambassador recorded his achievement.
The professor has discovered 4 new planets rolling about the sphere of Jupiter, the true cause of the Milky Way, and that the moon is not spherical. He has overthrown all former astronomy.
Even now,
presented to Queen Catherine de' Medici. In England, Shakespeare had thrilled massive audiences with extraordinary new plays. While in Italy, a radical new art form had been unveiled. Born in the house of the Medici, opera took the dramatic stories of classical heroes and set them to music. It had been performed by Galileo's own father. One by one, 3 generations of Medici dukes inherited a position of extraordinary power. And Galileo had taught them all. He had bestowed on them the gift of education, a rare gift they would never forget.
I think that probably Galileo was more important to the Medici as time went on. For somebody like Ferdinand II, Galileo was an important image maker. The Medici were lucky. It's a remarkable coincidence to have one of your subjects turn out to be, such a scientific star.
But there was still a force in the world more powerful than the benevolent wisdom of an individual thinker. The force of religious conformity. A friend of Galileo had paid the ultimate price for intellectual freedom. Giordano Bruno was a Dominican friar. He had devoted his life to the service of God, but he was also a scientist. For publishing his theory that the universe was infinite, he was burned alive by the Roman Inquisition. In exceptional cases, the Inquisition showed mercy. They placed a bag of gunpowder around their victim's neck. Galileo knew how powerful and dangerous the truth could be. And he knew his own ideas were testing the Inquisition's patience. For over 1,000 years, the Church had taught that the Sun and all the planets revolved around the Earth. This fundamental truth underpinned the very essence of Christian identity. But Galileo had observed the universe for himself. He had come to the radical conclusion that the Earth, in fact, revolved around the Sun. His skeptical friends protested. Surely, if the Earth was traveling through space, then they would feel it here on Earth. Galileo argued that, as fish remain inside their bowl, even if the bowl is moved around, so we can happily exist untroubled by the motions of the planets. It was a dangerously seductive idea.
I think the revelation that the Earth goes around the Sun rather than vice versa must have just been shocking. It must have been earth-shattering, literally, because it threatens the whole notion of the Christian cosmology.
The choice that now faced Galileo was simple. Neglect the truth to save his neck, or publish and be damned.
I do not believe that the same God who has endowed us with senses, reason, and intellect has intended us to forgo their use.
Galileo believes completely that the Earth goes around the Sun. He knows that he cannot say that. Okay? So he's walking a thin line